Hello, my name is Dr. Dobie Moser, and welcome to our St. Ambrose Courageous Conversations on Understanding Mental Illness. This is the first of 4 interviews on mental health with Dr. Edgardo Padin-Rivera, who served as Senior Supervising Psychologist at Cleveland Veterans Administration Medical Center, where he directed the Center for Stress Recovery, PTSD, and Psychological Services. Dr. Padin also received the Ohio Governor's Service Commendation Medal in recognition of his role in founding the Ohio Cares Network, a group that is working with the National Guard to develop mental health programs for veterans and their families. Welcome, Dr. Padin.
Thank you, Dobie.
So this first session, looking at the general mental illness and understanding it, I believe the recent statistics, 1 out of 5 persons experience mental illness. Can you give us a general overview of mental illness and what that looks like?
Well, I think a couple of things have to be discussed in terms of mental illness so people get a better idea of the behaviors that they see and what is going on with the person. The first is that mental illness, much like many other behavioral problems that we see, are on a continuum. So they go from mild to severe, and as a matter of fact, we diagnose them in that way: mild, moderate, or severe mental illness. Some mild mental illnesses we barely recognize, and people lead more or less functional lives, but when it comes to certain situations, they are not able to function properly, or they're not able to do what they need to do. They could be short or long-term mental illnesses. So someone may have a depressive episode, become very depressed, either with a little bit of help or sometimes no help at all. They'll come out of it and they'll be fine. Some of these are the result of a major difficult incident happening in their life or a loss happening in their life.
Sure.
They become depressed. They could be long-term, and we'll talk a little bit about long-term illnesses. They could be a single episode, or they could be recurring. One of the things about major depressive disorder is that it could become chronic, so that person goes through a depression, they get some treatment, some help, they're okay for a while, and then it happens again, and then it happens again, and it kind of recurs through a large part of their life. So that's a recurring disorder. And again, mild to severe, short or long-term, single episode of recurring.
So if I may,
Yeah.
So that idea, thank you for the continuum from mild to severe. How does one pay attention to knowing where they are on that, and when it moves from this is a mild experience that can be navigated in any number of ways to something that is, moderate or even severe? Where are those lines drawn, or how can we know what to look for, so that some, I would think, severe, for instance, require more help?
Yeah, well, of course, one has to observe what is going on. If you're a parent and you have an adolescent who, for some reason, decides, I can't go to school today, I really feel badly, I'm weak, I'm tired, I don't care about even going in, that's a problem. If that continues, then that could be a moderate. Now, if a child has a mild case of depression or even anxiety, you may be able to talk them into going into school and functioning at a certain level. They may be okay. Once it gets to moderate, then you have to start observing the behavior closely and see what's going on. Are they withdrawing? Do they refuse to talk with friends? Are they staying in their room a lot? Are they playing video games a lot and not interacting with other people or even with the family? Those are moderate symptoms of what could be anxiety or depression, and you have to start observing. And you may want to think about getting help before it becomes severe, because once it becomes severe, then there's a darkness that encompasses the individual. There's a feeling of, I don't care about life anymore. Sometimes they become suicidal.
Wow.
So you don't really want it to get to that point. So observing closely the behavior and what's going on and how well that person is able to function is really the most important aspect of finding out.
So I would think, Dr. Padin, that um, when you say observing, any pointers on that? I mean, because if it's a child or even a family member, we're around them all the time and we don't have the clinical background that you have. Are there particular behaviors or things that kind of are warning signs, flashpoints that say, okay, this is moderate or it would require an assessment? I think there's no family that thinks that this is going to happen in their family,
Yes.
and yet it does.
And yet it does.
And commonly, from the statistics and otherwise, what is that step even when somebody is feeling that uncertainty, like, wait a minute, I am observing, this does look different, what do I do?
Okay. So at that point, you have to look at different disorders, and we'd have to talk about what disorder are we looking at. And there's many types of disorders or diseases, and I want to make a distinction between the two that we're looking for. If we're looking at major depressive disorder, you're looking for one type of behavior. If you're looking for anxiety disorder, it's a different type of behavior. And so it's hard for me to tell you one particular thing. However, if the behavior, and you're always looking at behaviors, that is, you're looking at what they talk about or don't talk about, you're looking at how they behave, what are the types of things that they do. A good example of that would be if you have a loved one or a child who usually loves to do a particular activity, if they suddenly give up that activity and don't want to do it anymore, that's a red flag you need to look at.
Thank you.
If they lose their energy, if they don't feel as energetic, if they don't, for instance, want to play sports or go out and watch sports, and they used to love that, that's a red flag. So activities that they like to do that they suddenly stop for no good reason.
Right.
It's a good question to ask them. You know, you don't do this anymore. Why is that? Do you not like it? What's going on? And see how they answer that. If they answer it with, I don't really care about anything anymore, I don't really care about that, that's a red flag. So things that they've given up, a lot of mental illness is a separation from their normal world. It's a separation from what they normally do. And so you want to watch those kinds of behaviors.
So, that's really helpful to hear. One of the things that I find insightful would be not only the observing, thank you, but engaging them in a conversation about it. So you don't have to be clinically trained. And
No.
I know many of us feel like, oh my, they're feeling down, I don't want to ask them about it, or am I afraid to make them feel worse? But what I hear you saying is actually having conversations based on the observations is a really important step to begin to name things and find out what they are and maybe even indicate what the next step might be.
Yes, I think that's a very good point. Being careful not to place them in a situation where they feel ashamed, where they feel criticized, where they feel third degreed, if you will.
Yeah.
But naming what you're feeling as you see them and what's going on for you, that's really very helpful.
So can you give any pointers? I really appreciate you bringing up the shame idea of none of us would intentionally shame our child, a family member, a loved one, and yet it can happen. What does that look like and sound like? Or are there any pointers about how do we avoid that pothole that just like Northeast Ohio winters is waiting to drive into unseen? That whole idea of shame, and because that's not our intent, but it certainly happens.
Yes. Well, of course, signs are important, and bringing those signs to light are important.
Right.
So just saying something like, I notice you haven't been doing such and such that you usually like. Is there a reason for that? Can you tell me, why you may not want to do that anymore or what's going
Got it.
on? Just saying, I'm worried about you is important. Sometimes a person will respond defensively, say there's nothing wrong. Sometimes you have to know when to stop asking the question. So,
So one of the things I hear, tell me if this is correct, is the examples you just gave are open-ended. They're not judgmental. They're not saying,
absolutely.
I think you are, or you seem to be feeling. They're, hey, I noticed that.
Right.
What are you feeling? So they're open for the person to have the space to go where they may choose to go.
Yes. And one of the major points here is not discounting their experience. Making sure that they don't feel like you're belittling or you're saying that they shouldn't be feeling that way. So you have to stay away from that because their experience is their experience. And to say things like, well, I know how you feel, drives them away because no one wants to hear somebody else tell them that they know how they feel.
And we have all done that.
And we have all done that, unfortunately.
Not helpful.
Don't dismiss their symptoms. Also, don't harp on it. You don't need to get all the information right away. The thing is, begin the dialogue, see how far it can go. But if you notice them getting defensive or don't want to talk, let it go for now. You can have another conversation a little bit later.
Wow, that is really...
So it's not important to get all the information right away. Even though your anxiety is telling you, I got to find out, you have to kind of control that anxiety in yourself as a loved one, a caretaker, or a parent. One of the most important things that I give to caretakers is control your own distress and anxiety about what you see. Because then you lose your ability to empathize with the person in front of you or next to you.
Wow, and so that word empathy and empathizing, can you talk about that in its role in working with someone, again, a loved one, someone we're caretaking for, a child, that the role of empathy in how we respond and convey that, because that it just seems so important.
Yes, I'd like to save that for another time
Okay.
at this point, but yes, that is important, and I think we can kind of discuss it in another video if we
Sure.
can.
No, thank you very much. So I know you have a lot of experience professionally and for decades have done great work in the area of post-traumatic stress and the syndrome of that. Or the disorder of that. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what is the distinction between post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic stress disorder?
Okay, let me get to that as I talk about this distinction that I really want to make for people, because I think there's a lot of misinformation, if you will, it's a current word, about mental illness and what it is and how it works.
Please.
So within mental illness, the source, which is what people are always asking about, the source or the cause of the disease can be one of two things. One of them is some mental illnesses are a brain disease.
Right.
That is, there is a malfunctioning in the brain itself that causes the individual to have these disordered kinds of thinking or behavior or emotional distress.
Got it.
So that's one. But then there is a psychosocial experience process, and that is someone goes through some great traumatic, difficult event in their life that causes them to then behave, think, act, and respond emotionally in a certain way. An example of this is major depressive disorder.
Right.
Major depressive disorder could be one that is derived from either an experience that has caused the individual to feel that way. As I said earlier, it could be a great loss, or it could be a overwhelming task that the individual feels that they can no longer function, they become very depressed. Or it could be a disease process.
Right.
It could be that nothing is happening into the individual in their normal day life, but something happens to the brain, it malfunctions, and they become very depressed. So that's two different kinds of major depressive disorder. You also have anxiety disorders that are very similar and work that same way. Something that's important to parents and caretakers is we need to know about the idea of temperament. That's the one thing that we have found within psychology and psychiatry that's very important to how an individual reacts to this environment. Some individuals react very placidly to the environment, and they are able to take the environment in. They're able to work within the environment and be flexible. They're able to respond to the environment and to tasks in very flexible and easygoing ways.
Right.
Others have great difficulty, and they tend toward rigidity. They tend toward needing everything to be very solidly in order. Now, these are temperaments that individuals are born with. There's more than two.
Right.
There's a third one because there's an individual who is a thrill seeker,
Right.
who really needs to get more out of the environment constantly. So there's more than two. But the two major ones that I'm talking about here is the rigid individual, the one
Right.
that needs to have their life ordered. Otherwise, their anxiety level goes high. And it could get so high that it becomes a disorder. They become unable to work with the environment and respond. Then there's the individual who's very flexible, sometimes too flexible. They can become impulsive. They can do things
Right.
and then regret them. Sometimes they do things and to the extent that they get in trouble with society and the law, and that becomes a mental health issue. So there's this idea of temperament becomes very important.
It almost sounds like the temperament, as you mentioned other pieces, itself is on a continuum.
Itself is on a continuum. Absolutely, that's true. Yes, it is. If you're looking for individuals who are on a high continuum, let's say, of thrill-seeking environment, then you've got people who can become narcissistic. You've got people who can become, I hate to use the word outlaw, but antisocial.
Right.
They have a disregard for laws, and they have these kinds of behavioral problems. So post-traumatic stress, and that's why I bring that. Post-traumatic stress is a disorder. It's not a disease. It's not a brain disease. There's nothing in our brain that is disordered that cannot be brought back, if you will.
Got it.
There are aspects of everything that we do in life that have to do with our brain. But that doesn't mean that you have a brain that is diseased versus brain that is disordered.
Got
and
it.
we need to make those kinds. What happens to an individual is they go through this overwhelming event. It shapes, because of the overwhelmingness of the event, it shapes the way that they think, the way that they behave, and the way that they have emotions about the world around them. Everybody goes through this when they go through an overwhelming event.
Right.
The difference is your temperament will then determine, are you going to be able to work through it and be flexible and come out of it with some resilience, or are you going to be stuck in this event and make your personality rigid? And then what happens is that over time, everyone that goes through it, within a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, they begin to make it into a history. They begin to say, well, that happened to me. I didn't like it. It was bad, but I learned something from it. But if you have a different type of temperament, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 6 months, 10 months, you're still living in that event. It's still overwhelming you. And every time that something reminds you of that event, every time that you come near something that is a reminder of that event, or even thinking about it, overwhelms you and you become stuck in that event. It doesn't leave you. So that's the difference between the two.
And as I hear you talking about that, Dr. Padin, it sounds like some people would call some of those things triggers,
They are
in the
triggers.
sense that they are reliving, re-experiencing.
Yes.
And I also hear in your remarks of how different people's background, personality, and otherwise is a significant factor in how individuals deal with trauma. So it can be the same event, and you and I might have markedly different experiences of it, based on that continuum where we are in our own life experience.
And here's a complicating factor. A complicating factor is that an individual with different types of temperament, parenting becomes crucial as they grow up, because parents who recognize children with different temperaments and who they themselves are flexible are able to help these individuals early on how to navigate the environment so that they can have better outcomes when things happen to them. So parenting becomes crucial in terms of helping the individual personality. I'll give you an example of that, if you will. My daughter is on a continuum of a thrill seeker. Loves to go out there, try new things. She's wonderful at taking in life, whatever it brings her. And she's very good at it.
Yes, she is.
My son, however, likes order. He does not like a whole lot of, if you will, a whole lot of excitement.
Right.
And Kara and I, my wife, learned very early on that he can only stand so much excitement, and then he has to back off. Right. He has to isolate. He has to not be involved anymore. So it was very different for me as a parent, because as a child, I'm more like my daughter. I was more like my daughter. I love sports. I loved excitement. I loved to do things. And when my son was born, interestingly enough, my daughter, when she was born, she would cry before she goes to bed because she wanted more and more and more. My son, on the other hand, when we would put him in a crib, he'd just be asleep in seconds. He wouldn't say a word. He'd just sit back there in his room. We thought he was dead. So we learned very early on. And I only say this because parents need to realize children have different temperaments, and they have to tailor their parenting to the temperament of the child. And they have to tailor it as they grow up, as they develop, so that that child can learn to navigate their environment according to the temperament that they have, and it fits them best.
Boy, there's a lot of wisdom there, Dr. Padin. I think the insight that we as parents, the temptation to project our temperament onto our children, and that's the way I was, and it is very natural for every one of us. I experience it this way, therefore you must experience it this way, or it meant so much to me this way. And we just need to give the space, as I hear you, to allow for that. Okay, their experience and their temperament is different than our own.
Let me tell you, when my son was 6 years old, we put him in a little soccer league thing for little kids. And he was a boy. We expected him to get in there and be very active and do his best. Well, all the little boys were out there playing, chasing the ball, kicking it. And my son, Adrian, was looking at the field and picking flowers and didn't really care what was going on. And Kara and I looked at each other and said, well, sports is not going to be his thing. It's just not going to be his thing. So we encouraged him. It doesn't mean you don't encourage, but we encourage him a little baseball, a little basketball. He never took to it. And it was a big disappointment to me as someone who loved all these sports.
Right.
But I had to learn and let my son teach me what his temperament was and how he would best navigate the world. This is kind of what we have to do as parents.
Right, and you're aware of my professional background as the director of CYO in the Diocese of Cleveland, that I can just tell you the pain and experience of too many children who their temperament and interest related to a sport may just be social and fun, or I'm there, but it's not the center of my universe. When parents have a very different mindset about that, it is just painful.
It's painful. It makes it very difficult for the child.
And it ends up being...
It sets up expectations for the person that they cannot meet. Parents are very important in a child's life, even as they're older, even as they grow up. And if you set expectations that they can't meet, they forever feel guilty somehow.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to the point you had made earlier. Even though, again, while not intentional, that kind of stuff literally can lead to the shaming part.
Yes, it
Because
can. Yes, it
they're
can.
not living up to an expectation that they have somehow received and interpreted. And we as the adults, parents, and otherwise need to be mindful of that. Can
I want to talk to
go
you
ahead,
about mental health diseases
please?
because sometimes caregivers, parents, loved ones feel guilty when a person has a disorder, has a disease. And I want to rectify for people the idea that it's not your fault in many cases. So there are three major diseases that are not reliant upon temperament. A little bit they are in their manifestations, but bipolar disease.
You bet.
Bipolar disease is a brain disease, and it's usually goes from where a person feels extremes of being elated, hyper agitated, grandiose, delusional,
Right.
even violent. They can be, and it really is the function of neurons in your brain not functioning properly.
Got it.
So usually in the brain, people's neurons function so that electrical currents run between neurons. Very complicated system that allows them to feel and see and sense things and respond to them.
Got
When
it.
those go awry, you can get real problems. So there's bipolar disease. This is a recurring disease. It's a lifelong disease. It has some medications that help people be able to function with the disease, but not
Right.
cure it. It's
Important.
impossible. And so you're going to have recurring problems over your lifetime with this disease. The same way with schizophrenia. We
Right.
often hear about schizophrenia. There have been all kinds of theories and ideas behind schizophrenia about whether or not it's caused by parents or it's caused by something in a person's life. All of that has been relegated to the past. Now, we know that it's a brain disease, and again, it's due to malfunctioning in the brain. So that the best that a caretaker or a parent can do with someone who has these diseases is help them find support, help support them through problems that they may encounter with the disease, and learn as much as you can about it.
Right. Right.
There's plenty of help out there. There are groups out there. These folks who have these diseases, and there's also major anxiety disorder diseases that are
Right.
similar. So these three groups that are diseases, they need psychiatric assistance, and there are medications for them, but they also need a lot of support from the family members to get people involved in groups and psychosocial management. One of the hardest problems with these disease processes is that the individual who's going through them, when they're going through them, have a difficult time managing medications, managing their emotions, managing themselves. And they get into trouble or they stop taking the medication because they don't want to be diseased. They don't want this disease.
Sure.
And so they stop taking the medication, and then, of course, it gets worse. So they need a lot of support.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of insight there related to any of these diseases or more serious things we'll be talking about in another episode. They all have a family dimension. So not only for helping that loved one, but also for the effect of that illness on the family.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's not isolated, and it's not a they or that person. It's a we experience. Do you have any particular, just in wrapping this up, any recommendations that you would make as people are navigating and perhaps for the first time or early on encountering mental illness in their family or themselves? Any pointers as to what they might do next or what you think? And again, I hear you that can be such a diverse possibility of illnesses, but in a general way, if you're concerned that mental illness might be part of this, any thoughts on what that person might do?
Are you talking about the caretaker, the loved one, the parent, or the person himself?
It could be any of those.
Yeah. So, well, so if we're talking about a disease, it's very hard for the individual who has the disease to know what's going on.
Right. So they're unaware.
So they're unaware for the most part. And amazingly enough, in many ways, they're unaware until the disease becomes pretty virulent.
Yeah.
So even mild symptoms of the disease, they're not aware of it, and it's hard for them to be aware of it.
Right.
Take schizophrenia as an example. Schizophrenia will show itself, small, mild symptoms, even as low as age 12, where individuals may show a little bit of aberrant behavior here and there, but the parents may not pay attention to it because it's not continuous. It's like happens maybe once or twice a month or every 6 weeks.
It's more
or something.
episodic. Yeah.
It's very episodic. The person, for instance, with schizophrenia, a young child, may say, there's worms in my food. They may say, there were people in my room last night. And the parents would console them, or they would try to talk them out of the idea that there's worms in their food, but not think about it as anything else, because the rest of their behavior may be perfectly okay.
Yeah, it's within that range.
It's within that range. It's not until the child reaches ages 17, 18, 19 when full-blown schizophrenia really comes into the scene.
Right.
And then
Impossible
parents,
to ignore, right?
Right. Then the parents recognize, oh my God, there's something wrong, and begin to actually do something about it. At that point, of course, you must not deny that this person is sick. You must take them to a doctor. Usually you go to the primary care doctor, who will then refer them to a psychiatrist.
Right.
It's good to go to a primary care doctor because especially schizophrenia, although manic disorder also, may be due to something other than a disease process in the brain. It could be some physical, hormonal,
illness,
something else going on that may be temporary, or maybe even a traumatic event, which sometimes mimics schizophrenia in the aftermath. So a medical doctor, a GP practitioner, may want to look at that and maybe make a general diagnosis, if you will, and then send them to a psychiatrist who will do the job of diagnosing the exact kind of schizophrenia, the exact kind of bipolar disorder. And that's another thing that people have to kind of come understand. There's schizophrenia, but then there's 7 different types.
Right. Within
There's
that.
manic disorder, but then there's 3 different types. And only a psychiatrist will be able to give you a better idea of he's got this type of disease and we need to treat it with this kind of medication and this kind of social support. So those are important components of the diagnosis and the treatment.
No, so thank you. I want to mention as we wrap up, one of the organizations Dr. Padin referred to organizations would be NAMI. It's the National Alliance on Mental Illness. We have one here in Cleveland, but they're also around the country, and they have a vast library, virtually and otherwise, of resources. And also, in our case, this initiative is part of St. Ambrose Catholic Church, and we call it Mental Health Ministry. And the goal of it is a compassionate response to individuals and families that are going through mental health challenges. So there are faith communities. Ours is one of them. We want and encourage as many as possible to have that kind of ministry. This can and does happen in many, many families. And the goal is to be compassionate, to respond with tenderness and care to help them navigate these very real challenges. Thank you and God bless you.